I am now going to turn it over to, I'm going to call you a colleague and a friend. My bestie, I just met her like 8 hours ago, so we go way back. She's a contributing editor at New York Magazine. She's author of the book All Joy, No Fun, refreshingly detailing the changing role of parents over the years, how children change our lives so completely. You have to read this book. You will quickly realize you are not alone in this, I promise you. We all feel the same way. And she's wonderfully fun. And Jennifer Senior, come on up here.
Oh, thank you. That girl could make coffee excited. Oh my God. Okay. Hi, good morning. So, one of the most robust findings in social science is that kids do not improve their parents' happiness. Not one iota. If anything, they slightly compromise it, and it's worse for women than it is for men. This is not a one-off finding. As I said, it's very robust. There's a literature going back 50 years that actually talks about this. The most famous study of its kind, and you can find it in every silo of social science, by the way. The most famous study of this kind, which many of you might know about, it was done by Danny Kahneman in 2004. It became an instant classic the second it was published, was he and his colleagues. They interviewed 909 women from Texas, and they asked them to go about recreating their day. They asked them what they were doing at every moment and how much they liked doing it, how they felt while they were doing it. And unbeknownst to them, childcare clocked in 16 out of 19 in pleasurability. So things that clocked in higher, vacuuming. Housework clocked in higher. Something else that clocked in higher, which I personally like, napping, which is to say that losing consciousness entirely was considered preferable to spending time with their kids. Now, here's the thing. I have been studying how kids affect their parents for quite some time. I wrote a book about it, as you very kindly mentioned, All Joy, No Fun. And here's what I can say. I can very safely stipulate here. Kids are not the problem. Something about parenting right now in 2014, that's the problem. Parenting has changed a lot over the last few generations, a lot. I'm going to discuss 3 ways that I think are very significant, particularly for women. So the first is choice. I know it sounds very obvious, but I really want to flesh this one out. In Plymouth Colony, there were 8 kids per family. In 1850, there were 5. Today, there are 2. We're also deferring having kids. If you are a college-educated woman, odds are you're going to have your first child when you are 30.3 years old. That's a national average. So now imagine what it's like in dense metropolitan areas in New York and LA and Chicago and Detroit and Boston. It's going to be higher. Now, there are consequences to this. I mean, this means that basically having kids is the equivalent of what marriage was in Jane Austen novels, right? It's this capstone to a life, this thing that the heroine is kind of racing toward. So imagine how much meaning you assign to the experience of parenthood once you finally have it, and how much value you assign to each kid once you have them, because you're only having 2. This is a very big deal. Now, here is the kind of paradox, or at least the recipe for tension that is baked into this particular situation. If you are deferring having kids until your 30s, odds are you're leaving a pretty good job. You're probably making a fair amount of money, you probably have a fair amount of responsibility. That job that you've just left was pretty hard won, that status there. But you've also just had this baby. And having that kid was also hard won because you waited. You waited until you were secure enough to have that child. So you really want to enjoy both. You have these 2 high-stakes investments in your life that are in some ways competing, and that's pretty intense. It is very different from graduating from college and having your first kid at 22 and having 3 more by the time you're 30. It's different. Okay, so that's change number 1. Change number 2. We don't consider this, but it's historical. The role of the child has changed dramatically in the last 70 years, let's say. Sorry, I'm kind of new at this. Kids until very recently were considered economic assets, right? Now, it's pretty much the opposite. they're very expensive. They used to work for us, and now essentially we work for them. It takes 2 incomes to raise them. If anybody out here has a kid who was born in 2010, you should know that your child is going to cost you $300,000 to raise, and that doesn't include college. And they are huge investments of time, because in a world of shrinking middle class prospects, we don't feel like we can have an average kid, we have to have a super child. So we run all over creation doing a million things for them. We take them to competitive speed skating and t-ball and soccer practice. We teach them piano, and we probably learn the piano too because we're doing it the Suzuki method. This is a ton of work for us. And no, it's very, very time consuming. And who do you think this falls to? It's mothers, mainly, who assume the burden. And this brings me to my third point. And my third, what I think is the third significant change. So women are in the workforce now in record numbers, right? Our workforce participation has never been higher. Yet, we still at home do not have a good set of scripts for how to divide the chores now that both men and women are breadwinners. I just want to tell you, this is a really big source of tension in couples. This is what couples fight about most. It's not sex, it's not money, it's not annoying friends, it's not personal habits. It's who does what around the house. Sorry, lost my place again. So here's how I would look at it. Women still do twice as much childcare. They do twice as much housework. Men do more paid work, right? So objectively speaking, if you look at the ledgers, the amount of hours that everybody puts in is kind of even. Here's the problem. When women come home, they don't think of home as being a haven. They think the shot clock is running the minute they walk home and they walk through the door, because they are doing far more deadline-centered work than their husbands are. They're the ones who are anxious about getting food on the table by 6, dinner prepared by, getting homework checked by 8, getting the kids bathed by 9 o'clock. That's the way that they're thinking. Whereas men are doing less deadline-centered stuff, like very famously yard work. And I'm not capitulating to stereotypes when I actually say this. This is in fact borne out in American Time use surveys, in diary studies from universities, and it explained, and also here's another thing, women multitask much more when they're at home. They're dividing and subdividing their time. They essentially feel like home is like a video game where they're ducking and dodging debris and racing around, whereas men are very calmly going from one activity to the next. They multitask when they are at work. So this is how you get this scenario that many women can tell you about, where it's the morning, they're making oatmeal, and they're also on their on their phone, writing their boss, and they're also playing a game with their kid, and their husbands are fully dressed and have read the paper, right? There's a reason for that. So she looks and says, "Why haven't you been doing anything?" And he says, "What do you mean? I'm about to face an 11-hour day." It's a recipe for quarreling, is what it is. Here's the other consequence of women, now working so much: guilt. And I really feel strongly about this. I really want to talk a little bit about this. We are still extremely ambivalent as a culture about women working. It doesn't matter, as Chantal said, that 4 out of 10 mothers are now the primary, if not sole, breadwinners in their families. It doesn't matter if women really like their jobs. We still are very unresolved about this issue. And if you want to know how resolved, if you want to know how neurotically contradictory our views are about women in work, I'm just going to give you 2 statistics from Pew that I think kind of sum it all up for us, okay? They both came out last year. Number 1, more Americans than ever are completely delighted and okay with women out earning their husbands. 60% of them are great with that. On the other hand, number 2, 50% of all Americans think it would be much better if women stayed home with their kids full-time. Full-time. Resolve those 2. Knock yourself out. You can't do it. So this explains why women, though we are working at record levels, we are also spending more time with our kids than ever before. We now spend more time with our kids than mothers did in the 1960s. 4 more hours per week, to be precise. And whenever I say this, people don't believe me, but let me tell you what it is. If you look at the American Time use survey data, it is very clear why. In the 60s, Women kept impeccable homes. The floors were clean, there was no more ring around the collar, they made perfect dinners, and they put their kids in playpens, and they sent them off to go on their bikes and bang the gong at 6 o'clock and told them to come home. Now, if you look at the same data, we don't know how to cook. We don't clean at all. But man, do we spend a lot of time with our kids. And this change is also reflected in our language. And I think this is a really important linguistic shift to consider. Back in the 60s, if you stayed home with your kids, what were you? A housewife. Emphasis on the word house. We kept perfect homes. Now, if you stay home with your kid, what are you? A stay-at-home mom. Emphasis on mom. We have to be perfect mothers. Now, men are starting to feel this too, which is very, very interesting. They're the ones who are now reporting more work-life conflict. It's not women. And they are spending anywhere from 2 to 3 times as much time with their kids, which suggests that, I'm sorry, 2 to 3 is twice as much time or 3 times as much time with their children as their fathers spent with them. So what this suggests to me is that they're trying to be more like their mothers and not like their fathers, which stands to reason if you think about it, because they were raised watching Mary Poppins. They know that you can't be an estranged banker. You've got to be an engaged maker of kites, right? So I'm just going to leave you with this thought, though, and I think this is very important. We are so apoplectic and so guilty and feeling like we're not spending enough time with our kids. But if you ask kids this question, which Ellen Galinsky did a few years ago, she interviewed 1,000 children and say to them, are your parents spending enough time with you? Only 10% of these children said that they didn't see their mothers enough. But 34% of them said that they really wish their mothers would be less stressed out. Something to think about.